Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Dr. Swati Biswas from the Department of Islamic History and Culture, University of Calcutta. Today we are going to discuss from the paper Indian Polity, the module Mughal Empire's Mansabdari system. Mansabdari system was a unique system where every official in the Mughal Empire was given a military rank and file, and that was attached to the revenue system, and a kind of a system which was complicated in its nature, but it could accommodate everyone either in the administration or in the military to have a hierarchical order in the system. In this module, we are going to study the basic structure of the Mansabdari system, the evolution of the Mansabdari system, understanding the terms like Zat and Sawar, the salary system of the Mansabdars, and the composition of the army. The Mansabdari system is a unique system that was devised in India by the Mughals. The Mansab or rank in this system was awarded to an individual, fixed both his status in the official hierarchy as well as his salary. It also fixed the number of armed retainers or tabinan that the Mansabdar was responsible to maintain for the service of the state. Now, let's discuss the main features of this system. The Mansabdar could have been given a military post, an administrative post, or any other job in the court. The Mansabdari was a service that encompassed the administrative as well as the military position, as I have said in the beginning, and the state could utilize the same person for both the jobs. The salary could be paid in cash or grant in the form of Jagir. Grant of the Jagir gave the right to collect all kind of due from the Jagir for the state. The Mansabs range technically from 10 to 5,000 during Akbar. In the multiple of 10, there were 66 categories ranging from 10 to 100 and then from 50 to 100. Now, we have to understand that there were exactly not 66 categories. 66 category just was a notional figure. The rank increased during his successes, of course, and this increase of ranks complicated the system. But there was no other option to increase the rank because the size of the empire was bigger in the second half of the Mughal Empire. The term Mansab was not used uniformly in popular mind. Rank holders, usually up to 500, were called Mansabdars. From 500 to 2500 were called Amirs, and from 2500 and above were called Amiri Umda or Amir-e Azam. Later, all those below 1000 were called Mansabdars. So the term itself had an evolutionary character in the system. The system in the course of time was extended to the hereditary indigenous regional leaders, that is, different chiefs and rajas. The ranks from 5,000 to 10,000 were reserved definitely for the royal princess. During the last few years of Akbar's rule, Mirza Aziz Koka, who was Akbar's brother, and Raja Man Singh, related to Akbar through matrimonial relation, was promoted to the rank of 7,000 Mansabdar, and which was the highest that was possible during the time of Akbar. Till the time of Aurangzeb, 7,000 was the maximum Mansab that the noble could aspire for. However, over the period, the ranks granted to the princes rose to the dizzy height of 40,000 Zat. Now, let's discuss how the Mansabdari system really evolved. Now, the concept of Mansab surely goes back to the time of Chengiz Khan, who divided the army into number grades from 10 to 10,000. The Lodhis and the Surs had nobles holding ranks of 20,000, 10,000 and 5,000 sawars. The actual number of horses maintained by this number was not known. So a 5,000 sawar necessarily would not have maintained 5,000 horses or 5,000 cavalry men. This was again a notional term that was used. The division of the services, that is military ranks, from 10 to 5,000 to regular designated hierarchy of grades was a unique contribution for which credit has to be given to none other than Akbar. Generally, it is believed that the Mansabdari system came into being in the 11th year of Akbar's reign, that is in the year 1567. Abul Fazl, though, designates a rank also for Bairam Khan, who died much before that. So it was again something that was a kind of an honor given to Bairam Khan, that had he been living at this time or Mansabdari system was prevalent during his time, he would have given rough and about this Mansab rank. Interestingly, the other historians of the time does not designate any Mansab rank to anyone before 1567, including Nizamuddin, who was about the Bakshi in the system. Now, it is difficult to ascertain the number of horses maintained by the nobles, as the Jama during the period was much inflated. The actual number of horses maintained was ensured by the Dag system. This was ensured in the 18th year, that is 1573-74. The Dag system implied that the descriptive role of every soldier entertained by the Mansabdar would be noted, and the number of horses would also be periodically inspected along with the quality of the horses. The confirmation of promotion also depended upon the maintenance of the Dag system. Badauni, who was one of the critics again of Akbar and a contemporary of Akbar and a great historian of his time, noted that the noble would start with a rank of 20 as he himself started. After that, he could produce those 20 horsemen, and after that could be promoted up to the rank of about 100 Mansab. If he could raise his muster up to a number, then he can be through the Dag system attain 10,000 to 2,000 or even a higher Mansab, depending on his credibility. The nobility resisted the Dag system obviously as long as they could. The Dag system peculiarly entrusted enormous power in the hands of the junior officials, who sometimes used it even to harass the seniors and respectable nobles, because they are the ones who maintained the rule book. So it was they who inspected the horses and the soldiers. So if they had something in mind, they could manipulate the number and the quality too. Akbar personally intervened at times to pacify the nobles and during the situation or bring the situation under control. In spite of the strict Dag system or branding, it was reported that the nobles did not maintain the number of sawars or horsemen they were assigned to maintain. So this from the very beginning was a problem in the system. There was a trend of borrowing of sawars, and after the inspection they would be dismissed. The vigil of the state, though was very strict, could not encompass the whole empire, and it somehow fell inadequate. Now, let's move on to terms like Zat and Sawar. It is very important to understand these two terms if we have to understand the whole Mansabdari system. The this whole concept of Mansabdari depended on Zat and Sawar system, a dual rank system in the 40th year in 1595-96. According to this system, the Mansabdars were divided into three categories. The first category included those who maintained equal number of Sawars equal to their Mansab. So a 1000 Mansab, 1000 Sawar. The second category would include those who maintained half or more than half the Sawar but less than the equal to the Mansab rank. So 100 Mansabdar would be in the second category if he was a 50 Sawar or up to, let's say, 90 Sawar. The third category would include who maintained less than half the Sawar to their Mansab rank. That is below 50 if it is a 100 Mansabdar. 100 Mansabdar. It was during this time that about the Zat became as a designation of the personal rank. The term Zat and Sawar has been very intriguing to the historians. It was then realized that the Mansabdari system evolved with time. In the pre-1594-95 phase was different when there was only one rank. Post 94-95, in the dual rank system, one has to understand that the Zat was a personal rank of the noble and indicated his pay and status. The Sawar rank was the number of horses the noble had to maintain or expected to maintain. The Zat rank also indicated the number of horses, elephants and beasts of burden and carts a Mansabdar was expected to maintain. A Mansabdar of 400 rank was exempted from this maintenance, of course. This is also interesting to note that the quality of the horses like the Iraqi, Turki, Yabu or the mixed or the Indian breed which was called Jangla were clearly laid down. The quality of the elephants also had to be mentioned. We have to understand that elephant was an important issue in the army then. Abul Fazl though mentions that the beasts of burden were also presented for dag or branding, but of course there is no other information regarding this topic. Now, how was the salaries fixed in this Zat Sawar rank or the dual rank? The state regulated the number as well as the quality of the horses a Sawar is expected to maintain. The rule was that 10 Sawars would maintain 20 horses. This was called Dah Bisti system. This was done to ensure that the mobility of the Mughal army, which was always active. So the horses would get the adequate rest that was needed. A salary was fixed as per the number of horses a Sawar would keep and also according to the quality of the horses that he maintained. We can understand the imported horses would draw more money. The Mansabdar was allowed to keep 5% of total salary of the Sawars for his general expenses. A Jagir awarded to the Mansabdar was therefore a total of his Zat salary and the salary allowed to his contingent based on his Sawar rank. So a Mansabdar's salary would incorporate not only his Zat position or his Zat salary but also the Sawar rank, which is again 5% of what the Sawars would get collectively. A calculation made by Morland suggests that a Sawar during Akbar's period before Dak system would get roughly about 240 rupee. The salaries of the Mansabdars would depend on which Zat category he belonged. The salaries of the Mansabdar or soldiers were calculated in dam. 40 dams would make 1 rupee at that point of time. Hence, the revenue assessment for the purpose of grant of Jagir was called Jama Dami. Thus, the Zat salary of a nobleman of 5,000 of the first rank was about 30,000 a month. If he was in the second category, who would get around 29,000, and in the third category, who would receive something like 28,000 category, which supposedly in the contemporary concept was pretty high. The salaries of the Sawars, of course, was paid for separately. A noble was rewarded in his Zat salary if he maintained a larger contingent. The nobles had to make annual presentation to the emperor, and he in return would get more than he received. So this was a kind of a ritual that the Mansabdari system allowed. The nobles also had to incur the cost of establishment for collecting land revenue from the Jagirs. The salaries compared to the time was pretty good and attracted men from even outside India. And the number of Mansabdars is difficult to ascertain because no record actually clarifies the number. Now, the Abul Fazl does not list the Mansabdars below 500, and we have to understand that Mansabdars below 500 were much in number, because in the peripheral region of the empire there were many Mansabdars who were below 500. An estimate during the time of Jahangir given by Dujarric lists about 2,941 Mansabdars from say 10 to 5,000. Of these, 150 or 5.1% held the ranks of 2,500 or above. 150 odd individuals held all the civil or military positions in the army, therefore. This hand-picked bureaucracy was very efficient but solely dependent upon the emperor, and the organization of this group was the key to the smooth running of the empire. The instability, if any, because of the reason that the salary was not paid in cash. The land was always controlled by the local zamindars or elites, and they had a clan affiliation. So they were always in an antagonistic relation with the Jagirdar. The Jagir allotment gave rise to more pressure on the peasantry, as the system was coercive and exploitative. The control over the land during that time was also a matter of social status and a security for payment. Now, let's move from the Mansabdari system to the organization of the army. Now, we have to understand the bureaucracy was part of the Mansabdari system, but the Mansabdari system catered also to the army, because everyone in the bureaucracy and in the army would have a military rank. Now we are going to talk about only those organizations or that group which had a pristine military rank. The army in the Mughal period consisted of cavalry, infantry, artillery, elephants, and even camels. There was no navy. The Mughals instead maintained a flotilla of boats which was under an admiral or Amir-ul-Bahar. They would also control the boats. The quality of the leadership was also exemplary, which induced the needed confidence. The Mughal cavalry was worth mentioning, and in the contemporary world was praised not only by the travelers but even the other empires. The rulers paid huge attention to the maintenance of this contingent, and through the dark system, the excellence was well ensured, at least during the time of the imperial Mughals. The horses were mostly imported from Iraq, Iran, and Arabia. The cavalrymen were protected by iron helmets and other defensive armor. The horses also had their neck, chests, and backs fully covered. The Sawars were adequately armed with swords, lances, and bows. So, in a way, they were invincible. Initially, the state did not pay for the horses or the cost of armor of a troop. Then there was an ad hoc pay of Baravardi introduced. Now, in case of Baravardi, an ad hoc payment would be given to a person to maintain a troop. In some cases, the state directly employed soldiers and sent them to high Mansabdars. Now, such troopers were called Dakhili, and they were also important for their excellence. In this regard, mention should also be made of the Ahadis. They were known as gentlemen troopers, and they were maintained by the state. They usually had 5 horses or more, and a separate master was maintained by them by the state. The separate Diwan would maintain their account. They could be appointed anywhere in the army or even served as messengers. On some occasions, they could be even appointed with one Mansabdar. Now, let's move to the artillery in the Mughal troop. The difference between the army of Delhi Sultanate and the army of the Mughals is that Mughals excelled in their artillery capacity even in the contemporary world. The artillery had developed rapidly in India shortly after the advent of Babur. The siege guns were introduced along with heavy guns mounted on forts. The siege guns were not easily maneuverable, and the elephants and a huge number of bullocks were used to transport them. They were slow in firing and was not convenient for war. The existence of it was more of like a visual impact. So if there was these guns, then the enemy or the opposition would be in some kind of fear. Apart from heavy artillery, there were several types of light artillery. If carried on the back of a human, it would be called narnal, and if it would be carried by an elephant, it would be called gajal, and on the camel back, it was called surtnal. There were light swivel guns too. Apart from these swivel guns, we had the other types of artillery too. The camels were trained accordingly, and they had to lower themselves during the time of firing. So a kind of a training of these animals were also perhaps done. In the Battle of Panipat in 1526, they used guns on wheel carriages known as Araba, but Araba later did not become very popular. It is believed that guns on wheel carriage existed even before the advent of the Mughals, but in the recorded history is very poor. Now, the transportation of the guns were much of a hassle, and thus a gun was devised which could be carried in pieces. Now, this was an interesting part of the Mughal artillery. Wheel carriages or guns were improved. Guns that could be fired simultaneously were devised, and Akbar personally took interest in hand muskets, and thus the quality of it greatly improved. The matchlocks were 3 feet long. The barrels of the guns could be cleaned by a device of means of a machine drawn by an ox. So all these were to some extent innovation of the Mughals. Now let's move to the elephantry and infantry and other auxiliaries in use. Now the elephants in the Mughal army was legendary. Thousands of elements were used in the war. All the elephants again was branded. They carried the nobles and the arms and materials of war. They also formed the shield during the war. Their use posed another kind of problem. They could move hayward if surrounded by hostile cavalry and would kill their own soldiers at times. The infantry consisted of both fighting and non-fighting classes. Now, the fighting men were called the bandukchis. They had separate organizations with clerks and a treasurer and a daroga. They were again subdivided into many groups, and their salaries would range around 110 dams to 300 dams. The Dakhili soldiers recruited and directly paid for by the central government and handed over to the high Mansabdars were foot soldiers and matchlock men with them. A quarter of the fighting force consisted of bearers of matchlocks, carpenters, blacksmiths, water carriers, and pioneers who cleaned the way, or rather cleared the way for the army. The army also helped by runners for carrying messages, palki bearers, wrestlers, slaves. They helped the army but was never a part of it as such. Added to these auxiliaries, there were spies and palace guards who were considered to be again a part of the contingent. Now let us summarize what we have discussed in the module. The Mughal army was definitely a complex system but very modern compared to the time. It is difficult to assess the strength of this army by any means. The cavalry force, both central and provided by the regional nobles, must have been over lakh. The strength of the infantry and artillery is difficult to envisage. The strength of the army again depended on the astute intelligence of the emperor and the administration of the state. The army definitely was a backbone of the empire. Constant improvement in technology during this period definitely added to the advantage of the defense of the army. Thank you for your patience listening, and for further reference, we can go back to the e-text along with the module. Thank you.